I think we've kind of alluded to some of the main ways in which writing tools can be used, but could you just give us a really quick survey of just what are they capable of doing today? If I'm just hearing about this with like the chat GPT news and all that, like can AI write for me? Can it edit for me? What are we talking about exactly here?
Yeah, the ChatGPT thing, the what caught everybody by surprise was its ability to do a lot of general purpose writing. Like
Mhm.
any task you gave it, write me a blog post, write me an article, write me a press release, write me an email, write me a summary of this, and that it could just do it was, I think, what really caught people by surprise was how well it adapted without having to pick a model or a template like you do in some of these ad writing tools where you're, selecting, I want an ad or I want an article, and then you're putting a bunch of inputs in. In this case, you're just saying, I would like an article on this, and I want it to be this length and this tone and this style, and it just does it. So that's kind of where we are is like you're now, whether you're working directly with the language model company. So OpenAI makes the language model. Same with Cohere. They build their own language models. And then third party vendors like Jasper, Writer, Hyperwrite, WordTune, whoever, they can patch into the APIs from those companies and then build user interfaces and solutions on top of it. Now, some of these companies are also developing their own language models, or at least using their own proprietary data to tune and train these models further than what you can get by going direct to OpenAI. But generally, whether you're going to OpenAI through ChatGPT or going to one of these writing tools, you have the ability to generate language in any form you would today. So whether again it's emails, proposals, articles, um, video scripts, whatever it is, they're getting really good at just developing drafts. I think the misconception at the moment is that um, they're like publish ready drafts.
Mm.
I wouldn't think about it that way. I would think, at the most extent, you're creating a really solid first draft of whatever it is you're creating. But assume you're going to need the human in the loop, and you're going to need an editor, and you're probably going to still want a writer. Um, so out of the box, they're able to do that. When you start getting into stuff like what Writer is doing, which is just
Mm.
writer.com, if you haven't been there, like they'll actually train the models on your brand guidelines. Like they're specifically built for teams. And so it can actually be trained on your own data and your guidelines and tone and style so that when it's outputting something, it's actually fitting within your desired outcome or output based on your guidelines. And so that's possible today too. So I think there's different levels depending on what you're using it for, but that's generally what you're able to do is it really can write. And you and I told this story back in like 2015. We asked this question internally. We were a content agency at the time, like we were both working for my agency at the time. And it was like, can AI write? Like we were doing press releases and articles and blog posts and ebooks and white papers and all this stuff for clients. And I'd come to believe that AI was capable of doing it. Well, the answer at that time was no, it actually couldn't. We were
Mm.
sort of like misguided by some of the vendors in the market at the time. But that's not the case now. Like the answer is yes, it can write.
Yeah, and without getting too deep in the technical weeds, it's really important for writers or people in this space who are in the audience listening. If you tried out these tools several years ago and were unimpressed, you need to take another look because
I think it's
things
several
really,
months ago
for sure, several
in some
months ago.
cases.
Because since about 2017, with things like the development of transformers, which have made these large language models really robust and possible, the last several years have just been essentially a golden age of this technology really getting very, very, very good. And it's just the beginning.
Yeah, for sure.
So they can do these large language models and tools built on them can do some pretty stunning things today. But what limitations should we be expecting as of today when we're using them?
The main ones that jump out to me, and you can add in if you can think of other, is lack of citation. So you don't know where the data is coming from because it's not actually, as we've talked about before, copying and pasting anything. It's not just grabbing a line from Wikipedia or a corporate site and then regurgitating it. It's writing original content. It's predicting the next token or word in a sequence, and it's generating it based on its training data. So it doesn't really have citations per se in that way, but that's a major deficit, and it's a major thing that companies are working on. Like Google DeepMind, has talked publicly about Sparrow, which is their Chat GPT style agent. and that's supposed to have some kind of citations within it. I've seen lately that the expectation with ChatGPT is allow some sort of citations in it. I don't know
Mhm.
exactly how that'll work. I see people talking authoritatively about this, and I was like, "How do you know that?" Like, I don't understand how it's not public knowledge yet, how they would exactly do it. But I think the way it would work is almost like the well, there's 2 ways I could see it. So one would be it the AI tries to sort of predict what sources influenced its output. So it
Mhm.
writes something basically, and then it tries to like look at where it learned data from, and it's like, okay, these 3 links probably are the closest to site where it learned this information from. The other thing I assume is going to happen is actually attaching a knowledge base or search function to the outputs.
Mm.
So as it's outputting something and writing this original content, it's simultaneously looking up to confirm that it's correct. So like it's looking up the facts that it's spitting out. So it doesn't cite its sources and it doesn't know facts. Those are like the 2 biggest things. Now there's bias and there's all kinds of other concerns in it. But as a writer, if you're going to
Mm.
go in today and say, okay, I'm going to write a blog post about this topic today. Let's say you're a bank and you're about like 10 tips for people who are opening a retirement account, like Roth versus simple IRA or something like that. And it could write something like, that's really good. Now, it may have completely made stuff up. Like the facts in it could be completely wrong. Um, and it doesn't know that. A really practical example. I showed this on a webinar last week. I took our AI for Writers Summit page, event page. I gave it to OpenAI's Playground, which is using GPT 3.5 to write. And I said, write me a press release about this event. And I put the URL link in there. And it wrote like a 300-word press release that looked great, except that the city was San Francisco.
Mm.
It is a virtual event. It's not happening in San Francisco. It made up the dates the event was happening, made up who was speaking at the event, and a few other facts. I was like, I have no idea where I would even come up with this stuff. It's not even on our site anywhere. So it completely looked like a legit press release, but it was completely wrong. And I think those are the limitations. Is like it's not, it doesn't know facts. It doesn't necessarily know where its source data came from. And so the more like regulated your industry or the more important it is to be factual, you have to know that it's not good at those things right now to use them properly.
Yeah, and essentially the limitations here just naturally bring up the concerns, right? Using the technology, because if you are getting non-factual outputs that sound really good, you need to know that you need to check the machine's work before you publish anything.
Right. So you still need to be, and this is where, like, to go back to the question, what happens to writers and editors? I don't know because you become the domain expert or you're like knowledgeable about the case. Like if you go back to our agency as an example, we created a lot of content for a lot of complicated industries, robotics, engineering, chemicals, like stuff that we knew nothing about. And to be able to vet that work and turn it over to the client for review, you had to go learn the topic. So
Mhm.
you do all kinds of research to understand the topic so that, like, even for me, like, let's say I handed off a white paper on some chemical engineering process to an associate at the agency, and that associate wrote a piece back, and I'm like, sounds really good. If I knew nothing about chemical engineering, I could completely miss things in that article that were wrong.
Yeah.
Then we turned over to the client. The client, where did you get this information? This is like, you don't even understand how our business works. So part of being a writer is understanding your topic. You do research, you do interviews, like you learn the topic to write about it. And so even if you rely on an AI writing tool to write the draft, you still have to have the knowledge to determine if that draft is actually any good or not. It can look good and it can sound good, but it might be completely wrong. So I don't know actually what happens in that case because we become experts on the topic by researching and writing about the topic.
Mm.
If the AI just does the writing, how do we ever know if it's right? So I don't know the answer to that. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here.
This is just one of the many reasons that a writer's summit is needed, right? I mean,
Seriously.
there's so many different perspectives. No one, including us, has anything resembling total objective truth or answers here. Everyone is figuring this out on their own, some poorly, some well.
Yeah, and we're learning from our community in the process. That's why I love, like, so much of, like, if you follow me on LinkedIn, like, with a lot of our community has really started engaging there, and you'll see sometimes I'll put things out that aren't like half baked, like I didn't think about it at all, but it's things that maybe historically I would have sat on for a few months before I put something out that I was like perfect. But now I'll just put stuff. I'm like, I don't actually know for sure, but here's what I think we should be thinking about.
Mm.
And then I'll get like immediate feedback from the community of like, yeah, here's what I think, or here's this. And it's like, okay, that's perfect. Like, so a lot of what we're trying to do at the Institute with this podcast is to stimulate discussion, to like put things out there. And when we aren't confident in where it's going to go, we'll say that. Cause like, I think the more people are just talking about these topics and challenging each other, the faster we're going to figure this stuff out.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, it really is we're at the phase where we're figuring out still the right questions to ask
Yeah.
in a lot of ways.
Seriously.